The train groaned as it pulled into Dry Creek Station, a sun-scorched sliver of a town with more dust than buildings. As the wheels hissed to a stop, Eleanor Briggs stepped down onto the wooden platform, her boots barely touching the boards before whispers began to rise around her like wildfire. She wasn't what they expected, not in her dark green traveling coat, not with a book in one hand and a leather bag in the other, and certainly not with eyes that looked like they'd read every soul in sight. Men spat into the dirt and muttered under their breath. Women squinted from behind lace parasols. Even the sheriff tilted his hat in awkward silence as she walked past. Eleanor's heart beat like a war drum in her chest, but her face gave nothing away. She wasn't here to impress. She was here because she had nowhere else left to go. A letter in her pocket bore the name Mason Thorne, a widowed rancher in need of a wife. A practical arrangement, the letter had said, shared responsibilities, companionship, nothing more. But the man waiting at the edge of the platform didn't look like he'd written those words. Mason Thorne stood tall, sun-baked and stiff-jawed, with eyes that had seen too much war and not enough kindness. He didn't offer a hand. "You're her?" he asked. "Eleanor Briggs." "Yes." "You look, educated." "I am." "That might be a problem." She raised an eyebrow. "Then why send for a woman who reads Latin?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked toward his wagon. The ride to Thorne's ranch was silent, except for the creak of leather and the occasional grunt of the horses. The land stretched for miles, dry, cracked, and cruel. Eleanor took it in without flinching. She was used to hard places. When they reached the ranch, she saw more dust, more silence. A battered house, a barn with a crooked door, one dog half asleep in the shade. No warm welcome, no children, no family. "This is it?" she asked. Mason didn't look at her. "It's what I've got." That night, they sat across a table without speaking. Eleanor nibbled on stale bread and beans. Mason barely ate. Finally, he said, "I needed a woman who knew her place, who'd stay quiet, raise livestock, cook, clean." Eleanor folded her hands. "And I needed a man who wouldn't lie about what he wanted." "You gonna leave?" "No," she said, her voice calm, "but I won't be what you expect." The next morning, she packed her things, not to run, but to walk into town and make her own way. She found the doctor's office, a leaning shack with peeling paint and a weary man inside. "I have training in anatomy, sanitation, and triage," she said to Dr. Jasper Keene. "From Boston." He blinked. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Trying not to waste what I know." He stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You can start by boiling those bandages." And just like that, Eleanor Briggs began to take root in Dry Creek. Not as a bride, not as someone's property, but as a woman who refused to disappear. Whispers turned to stares, some admiring, some furious. Mason didn't come looking for her, but someone else did. The sun hung low over Dry Creek, casting everything in golden shadow. Eleanor stood outside the doctor's shack, sleeves rolled to her elbows, blood on her hands, not her own, but from the miner who'd staggered in earlier, with a gash across his thigh and whiskey on his breath. "He'll limp for a while," she told Dr. Keene as they scrubbed the tools clean, "but he'll live." "You've got a surgeon's hands," Keene muttered. Not quite a compliment, but not an insult either. "I had a mentor in Boston," she said. "Until he died in a fire he didn't set." Keene raised a brow but didn't press. People in Dry Creek had a habit of hiding their stories in plain sight, and Eleanor had hers locked tight. As she stepped into the general store that afternoon, the bell above the door jingled and a cold hush fell over the room. Heads turned, not at her this time, but at the man already standing by the counter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a dark coat dusted from travel and a scar curling just beneath one eye. His face was weathered, unreadable. His hands, thick and worn, rested on a battered satchel. "Don't get many strangers in Dry Creek," the shopkeeper said stiffly. "I'm not here for company," the man replied, his voice like gravel and whiskey. "Just supplies." Eleanor watched him carefully. He didn't glance her way, but something in his stillness caught her attention, like a hunting cat, composed, coiled. As he turned to leave, his eyes met hers. Just for a moment, and something shifted. Not recognition, not interest, just silence, the kind that lingered. She didn't see him again until 2 nights later. A knock came at the clinic door, hard, fast, urgent. Dr. Keene was asleep. Eleanor opened it, lantern in hand. There he stood, bleeding from his shoulder. "Bullet," he said simply, voice tight. "Didn't go through." "Who did this to you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped inside and sat without invitation. Eleanor set to work, hands swift, eyes sharp. He gritted his teeth as she removed the bullet, stitched the flesh, cleaned the wound. Not once did he cry out. When she finished, she washed her hands and finally asked, "Name?" He hesitated. "Call me Calder." She raised a brow. "That's your name?" "It's the one that stuck." Calder stood slowly, favoring his right side. "I'll pay." "You already did," she said, nodding toward the blood on her apron. He almost smiled. Almost. Over the next week, word spread that Calder had taken up residence in an old cabin near the canyon ridge. Some said he was an outlaw. Others said he used to be a soldier, a killer, a scout. No one really knew, but everyone agreed on one thing: he was dangerous. Eleanor wasn't sure what to make of him. He didn't seek her out, didn't linger in town. But once, while collecting herbs outside the ridge, she saw him sitting on a boulder, smoking a pipe, staring out across the land like he was looking for ghosts. She didn't wave, he didn't nod, but they saw each other, and that was enough. Back in town, the unease grew. Mason Thorne, her former almost husband, hadn't spoken to her since her arrival, but now he whispered in corners, spoke with men whose faces didn't belong to daylight. And Eleanor felt it. The storm was coming, but she didn't run. She had stopped running the day she got off that train. The church bells tolled at noon, but no one listened anymore. Dry Creek had grown restless. The saloon stayed full past sundown. Men whispered over cards and liquor, their voices low and bitter. Mason Thorne was among them, watching, calculating, planning. His pride hadn't recovered from Eleanor's rejection, and now her quiet success burned hotter than the sun. A woman like her wasn't supposed to last out here. She was supposed to beg or break. Instead, she stood taller each day, treating wounds, organizing supplies, even schooling the miners' kids behind the old church when she had time. And Calder, he remained a shadow, never close but never far. She'd see him on the ridge sometimes, rifle over his shoulder, eyes on the horizon. He didn't visit the clinic again, but he left things behind. A bundle of wild herbs on her doorstep, a note with no words, just a mark she didn't recognize. The message was clear. "I see you. You are not alone." The town's unease turned hostile when Eleanor stepped into the saloon one evening to retrieve medicine owed by the barkeep. Every head turned. Every man stared. She ignored them. But Mason didn't. He stood from his table, lips curled in a smile made of rot and smoke. "Well now," he drawled, "look what the wind dragged in." Eleanor didn't blink. "I came for the quinine." Mason stepped closer. "You're walking awful tall for someone with no man to hide behind." "I don't need a man," she said, "especially not one who writes lies in letters." His smirk vanished. "You think this town's going to protect you? That the law cares what happens to a woman who don't know her place?" She met his gaze, voice calm. "I think the law cares about who makes the biggest mess, and you're bleeding reputation fast, Mason." The barkeep tossed the medicine across the bar. She caught it without flinching and walked out, never looking back. But she felt it, the anger, the hatred, the danger that grew with every step she took away from what she was supposed to be. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire in the back room of the clinic, eyes on the flames, ears tuned to every sound outside. Then came a knock, two short, one long. She opened the door and there he was, Calder. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, like he already knew what had happened. "Mason's going to do something stupid," she said. "He already has," Calder replied. He walked in, slow and sure, placing a sack of dried meat on the table. "I heard his men asking questions. They're planning something." Eleanor's chest tightened. "Why tell me?" He stared at the fire. "Because you won't run, and because I've seen good people left to burn when no one warned them." She looked at him, really looked. the scar near his eye, the weight in his shoulders, the way he kept one hand near the knife on his belt. Even now. "Were you one of them?" she asked softly. "One of the ones no one warned?" He didn't answer. But that silence, it said enough. They sat in the quiet for a long time. Finally, she broke it. "You don't owe me anything." "No," he said, "but I owe someone like you. I owe what I never got." Then he stood, and before she could stop him, he was gone, back into the shadows, where men like him belonged, until someone gave them a reason to step out. The days turned hot and brittle, the kind of heat that cracked wood and soured tempers. Dry Creek held its breath, like even the land knew something terrible was coming. Eleanor woke before dawn every morning. She reinforced the clinic's doors, boarded the back windows, and moved her supplies into crates she could carry quickly if she had to run. She wouldn't run, but she'd be ready. Calder arrived just before sunup one morning, a rifle slung across his back, eyes grim. "They're gathering," he said without greeting. 5 men, maybe 6. Mason's got them convinced they're taking back what's his." "This land never belonged to him," Eleanor replied coldly. "Number but out here, truth's just what the loudest man shouts." She swallowed hard. "Then we'll shout louder." Calder blinked, then almost smiled. "You're the loudest quiet woman I've ever met." They spent the day preparing. Calder showed her where to lay traps, how to sharpen nails into stakes, how to listen for footsteps on dry grass. He moved like a wolf, silent, lean, calculating. But when he looked at her, his eyes were something else, wary, wounded, and, though he'd never say it, worried. "I won't let them hurt you," he said, tying wire near the edge of the porch. "You can't promise that," Eleanor replied. "Number, but I can make them bleed trying." That night she cooked a simple stew. Calder sat across from her, his back always to the door, hand near the knife on his belt. The fire crackled, and for once there was a softness in the air. "Where will you go when this is over?" she asked. He stirred his stew. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether you want me to." Eleanor froze. The question wasn't loaded. It wasn't romantic. It was simply honest. "I've been alone for a long time," she said. "I thought I preferred it. But lately, I don't know anymore." He looked at her then. The firelight caught the scar on his cheek, the tired lines beneath his eyes. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Who?" "A woman I didn't save." Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You're here now. That matters." They said nothing more that night. Words felt heavy, but the silence was warm. Just before dawn, smoke curled into the sky. Thin, faint, but real. Calder stood from where he'd been keeping watch and cursed under his breath. "They're burning something," he said. "Could be a warning, could be a trap." Eleanor stood beside him. Her palms itched with fear, but also resolve. "They want me scared," she said. "They want you gone." She looked out toward the distant hills where the smoke danced with the rising sun. "Then let's give them something to remember." They came at midday. No warning, no signals. Just hooves pounding like thunder and dust curling into the sky. Mason Thorne rode at the front, face twisted in fury, his coat flapping like a black flag. 5 men followed, guns strapped, eyes hard. The townsfolk watched from porches and alley shadows, no one daring to intervene. Eleanor stood on the clinic's porch, rifle in hand, breath steady. Beside her, Calder checked his rounds. Calm, calculated. But Eleanor saw the way his jaw clenched, the way he adjusted his stance, like he was preparing to fight ghosts as much as men. Mason pulled his horse to a stop, spitting into the dirt. "You've got 10 seconds to get out of my town," he barked. "This was never yours," Eleanor called back, "and I'm not leaving." "You think hiding behind a killer makes you strong?" Mason sneered. "He won't save you." "I don't need saving," she said. "Not anymore." Mason raised his arm. The first shot rang out before it could fall. Calder's bullet struck the man to Mason's right, spinning him from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Gunfire screamed across the street. Wood splintered. Windows shattered. Townspeople ducked behind barrels and doors. Eleanor fired once, twice dropping to her knees to reload. Calder moved like shadow, sliding between cover, taking men down with brutal precision. Blood hit the dust. Horses reared. Screams echoed. Mason dismounted and charged, straight for her. Eleanor barely had time to raise her rifle before he slammed into her, knocking the weapon aside. They hit the ground hard, her back slamming against the porch steps. "You should have stayed quiet," he hissed. "I never learned how," she gasped. He raised a fist, but before it fell, crack. Calder tackled him from behind, dragging him off her with a roar. They fought like wild animals. Fists, knives, fury. Mason was strong, desperate, but Calder was focused, controlled. He landed a blow to Mason's jaw, then another to his ribs. But Mason pulled a hidden blade and slashed. Blood spilled. Calder staggered. Eleanor screamed. Mason turned toward her, rage and triumph flashing in his eyes. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She grabbed her rifle, flipped it in her hands, and struck Mason across the face with the stock. Once, twice. He dropped to the ground, groaning. Calder leaned against the railing, blood running down his side. "It's done," she whispered. "Not yet," he rasped, because Mason moved again. Slow, desperate. He reached for his pistol. Eleanor raised her rifle, but Calder stepped forward and fired first. One clean shot. Mason fell. For good. The dust settled. The silence returned. And Dry Creek exhaled. Townsfolk crept out, faces pale and quiet. The sheriff finally showed his face, hat in hand, words caught in his throat. Calder handed him the smoking pistol. "He drew first," he said. The sheriff nodded. "I saw." No one questioned it. No one wanted to. Inside the clinic, Eleanor stitched Calder's wound with shaking hands. "You were bleeding," she whispered. "I'm still breathing," he said. She looked up at him. "What now?" He didn't smile, but he reached for her hand. "You tell me." The sun rose slow over Dry Creek, casting long, golden lines across the dirt roads and rooftops. The town looked almost peaceful, as if it hadn't just been torn open by bullets and blood the day before. Eleanor stood on the porch of the clinic, bandages on her arm, bruises blooming across her ribs, but her spine was straight, her gaze steady. Inside, Calder lay on the cot, resting, healing. His wound was clean, the fever breaking overnight. He hadn't said much since the fight, but when she brought him water, his hand would find hers, rough fingers curling over her wrist like a silent promise. The townspeople came slowly that morning. Some brought bread, others offered help repairing the porch. A few just nodded, shame in their eyes. No one asked her to leave. No one called her a mistake anymore. By sundown, a new sign hung on the clinic door. Briggs Medical Office small, clear, firm. She was no longer a question mark in Dry Creek. She was an answer. When Calder could stand again, they walked together through the hills beyond the town. The same trail where she'd first seen him, silent and still as stone. The wind rustled the tall grass. Birds chirped like nothing had ever happened. "You could leave," she said quietly, not looking at him. "The trouble's past." He shrugged. "Trouble never really leaves." "You know what I mean." He stopped walking. "You want me to?" She finally turned to him. "I'm tired of pretending I don't." His expression didn't change much, but his shoulders eased, just a little. "Then I'll stay." They stood there for a long moment, saying nothing, because some things didn't need words. Weeks passed. The clinic was busier now. Eleanor trained a local girl, taught her how to clean wounds, take pulses, brew fever-reducing tea. At night, she'd find Calder sitting on the porch, cleaning his rifle or mending tack. He never spoke of the past, but she saw it in his silence. The ghosts hadn't left him, but he was learning to live with them, just as she was learning to live with hope. One quiet morning, Eleanor stepped outside and found Calder planting a small pine sapling behind the clinic. She raised an eyebrow. "What's that for?" He didn't look up. "A marker. For what we built." She smiled. "It's not much," she said. "Yet." By summer, the fields around Dry Creek had started to green. Children ran through the grass without fear. The saloon grew quieter. The church reopened. And at the center of it all stood the woman who once arrived as a stranger with nowhere to go. Eleanor Briggs. Not someone's bride, Not someone's victim, just someone who stayed, someone who fought, someone who became a part of the land. And Calder? He was no longer the man who hid in shadows. He was the one who stood beside her, unapologetic, unforgotten, unafraid. 5 years had passed since gunfire echoed through the streets of Dry Creek. The town had changed. The saloon no longer roared through the night. The sheriff's office was freshly painted, the schoolhouse had doubled in size, and a garden bloomed where the old gallows used to stand. At the edge of town, a cabin stood taller now. Windows open, wildflowers blooming along the fence line, children's laughter ringing from the porch. Eleanor Calder, for she now wore both names proudly, stood beneath the old pine sapling, now grown taller than she was. Its branches danced gently in the warm breeze, roots gripping the earth like a promise. She pressed her hand against its bark and whispered, "You've made it." Behind her, Calder approached with quiet steps. His hair had grown silver at the edges, his scar faded but not gone. He still moved like a man who knew how to disappear, but now he chose to stay. "She asked about the stars again," he said. Eleanor turned. "And what did you tell her?" "That her mama taught me to look up again." Their daughter, Clara, ran across the yard barefoot, chasing her brother with a twig sword. Both of them carried Eleanor's fire and Calder's silence in different measures. The land no longer whispered threats. It hummed with life. Visitors still came through Dry Creek, some passing through, some staying. And when they asked about the woman who ran the clinic and the man who once wore a pistol like a second spine, the townsfolk only smiled. "They didn't just survive the West," someone would say. "They made it theirs." And when the wind blew through the hills, it carried no cries, no fear, only the scent of pine, the warmth of the sun, and the memory of two souls who refused to vanish. Because some people aren't meant to be remembered in stone or song. They're remembered in the land, and this land never forgets.